Hello, I'm Tashawn, and this is Legacy Liner. Welcome aboard. So today I'm going to finally do part 2 of how they found the wreck of the Titanic. I wanted to do the video today because it's the 39-year anniversary of them finding the wreck. It's been a while since part 1. I'll take responsibility for that. But I highly recommend you go watch part 1 again to refresh yourself and then come back and watch this video for part 2 of how they found the wreck of the Titanic. So on the morning of September 1st, just a few hours after the discovery, Dr. Ballard noticed that there was vessels starting to pop up on the NORAD's radar. He was beginning to see that there were ships kind of gathering around that area all of a sudden. And then he also noticed that there were aircraft flying over. And he just thought it was weird that now that they found the wreck of the Titanic, this random spot in the middle of the ocean is now beaming with all this life. Well, what they didn't know at the time was that they had actually sailed into a NATO exercise. They were doing some type of, maneuvering and things out there. And they had no clue that they were doing it over the spot where the Titanic was resting. So once Dr. Ballard processed everything and was able to kind of snap back into it, he decided it was time to let Woodhull know about his discovery. It was now late enough in the morning where it was an appropriate hour to call them. Well, they actually already knew that the Titanic had been found. Gossip travels quickly, even in the middle of the ocean, apparently. Dr. Ballard was a little bit confused by it because it would have seemed like it would have had to been almost a real-time leak, because the Sunday London Observer actually already had an article released about the finding of the wreck of the Titanic. So either they just completely made it up and took a gamble, or somebody on the ship sent some info, who knows, but nonetheless, the story had already gotten out, which I just find that crazy that gossip passed from the middle of the ocean. So at this point, Dr. Robert Ballard only had 4 days to explore the wreck. So he had a lot of stuff to do and very little time to do it, because he had to get the ship back to Woodhull because it had to be chartered for another expedition. But then also there was weather coming in. The area where the Titanic sank is notorious for bad weather. It's actually not too far away from where the perfect storm would have taken place. So it's an area that's really bad for foul weather. And anytime you hear about an expedition or watch a documentary about them going to the wreck of the Titanic, they always mention the weather is coming because that area is just bad for that. So they ended up finding out that John Louis was only about 200 meters away from finding the wreck of the Titanic when he did one of his very first passes. And this obviously irritated John Louis. I mean, it would me too. Could you imagine being able to say, oh yeah, I found the wreck of the Titanic on my first swipe that I did? But nonetheless, Dr. Robert Ballard told him that this was a partnership, it was a joint mission, so his success was for both of them. They both found the wreck of the Titanic. So they spent the first bit of exploration looking at the debris field. Titanic has this massive debris field, so they're just swiping over all of the debris, the boilers, the pots, the china, all of the different things that was just scattered all throughout the sea floor. And once they got all that footage, they finally decided it was time to explore the major wreck section that they were picking up. So they decided to go ahead on and have Argo do a pass over the bow section. And whenever it came time to do this, everyone was a wreck of nerves because they didn't know what the Titanic looked like yet. They didn't know how many of her funnels were still standing, if her masts were still standing, and even worse, if all of that rigging, all of those cables, wires, and stays were still in place. The Argo was a $500,000 piece of equipment, and having to lose something that oceanographers and scientists and engineers have put so many years of research and developing into making this thing and have it just get tangled up in the rigging of the Titanic was just be a nightmare. So a crowd of crew members all gathered on the deck, even though it wasn't their watch or shift to be working, just because they wanted to see what was going to be found. How was the condition of the ship? And so they were on the deck, but they weren't saying a word because they didn't want to mess up the flow and the focus that everyone had going. And as they passed over the ship, they ended up passing over the wheelhouse and saw that it was destroyed. They passed by the first funnel and saw that it had collapsed and was broken away. This actually made sense to Dr. Ballard because Colonel Archibald Gracie and Second Officer Charles Lightoller both reported that they saw that funnel topple over. They also ended up seeing the hole where the grand staircase would have been. So they saw that the glass dome had collapsed in. And one of the things that stuck out to Dr. Ballard was when they saw one of the davits, the empty davit on the boat deck. That made him think about how many of the passengers who were left behind stared at that very same davit, realizing that they were doomed to be left behind. The van, which was the name of the little structure that they had their setup in, it erupted with cheers and celebration again because people were just excited to see this ship. They found the Titanic and they developed technology that could now be used to see parts of the ocean that the world has never seen before. It had been nothing but speculation, and now they would actually be able to go down and see it for themselves. So this was very much a huge technological advancement. And for these oceanographers and marine biologists, they knew that they just opened up a door into seeing so much and learning so much more about our world's oceans. Now, Dr. Ballard didn't get much rest. Don't even think he went to sleep for like the next 24 hours. He stayed up, but he did end up forcing the rest of the crew to go back to bed because they had a 24-hour operation to run. They needed to be going all around the clock. So he needed them to be well rested so when their shift came, they could, be focused and ready. And they did it. They took thousands of pictures. They did end up noticing that the stern section of the Titanic was missing. It wasn't connected to the rest of the ship. Dr. Ballard was playing with the idea that the Titanic had broken in half, like what some of the survivors had said. But there was still also the belief that maybe the ship broke apart upon impact with the sea floor, because it was a 2.5-mile descent to the ocean floor. So they didn't rule that out as a possibility either. After collecting all of the videos and all of the pictures and images, it was time to pack up and leave because the weather was now approaching. While they were out there, a helicopter from some Canadian television network that had given some funding to their expedition had flew out and requested to land on the deck so that way they could, get their crew on board to get footage and do a report on them finding the Titanic. Dr. Robert Ballard and John Louise both said no, they didn't want them landing on the helicopter on the ship. That was just too much to deal with. But what they did allow was for them to circle around the ship and to get images of them working on the site. And they also decided to give them the footage of them finding the wreck whenever they saw the boiler and everyone was jumping up and excited. And they didn't really do this thinking much of it. They just thought, oh, okay, since there's fake news going out there, let's give some real info out. And so they gave it to the people because it was a network that helped fund the expedition. Seemed pretty harmless. This will be relevant later on in the story. Dr. Ballard noticed that there was a plane flying overhead that had a lot of antennas on it. And to him, that was an obvious sign that this was someone trying to pinpoint the location of where the Titanic was, just in case he didn't want to share that information with the world. Which, while we're on that subject, let's take a quick little detour for what was going on land at this time. When word got out that the Titanic was found, the media was in a frenzy. It must have seemed like it compared to when the Titanic itself sank. There were so many news reports. There's a video I'm going to put in the description below, and it has like an hour of footage from all the different news reports about the Titanic being found in 1985. And it's crazy just seeing, what people originally thought when the wreck was found. At this time, you have to keep in mind that Dr. Ballard is still out at sea, and he actually did some of these interviews while he was on the boat. Raise the Titanic had just came out a few years earlier. I think it came out like in 83 or something. I can't remember. Hold on, let me Google that. 1980. So Raise the Titanic had came out just 5 years earlier, and it was a box office bomb, but there is this spectacular scene where you see the Titanic, the wreck as they thought it looked at the time, raise up from the bottom of the sea, and it's a beautiful scene. I watch it sometimes just, when I'm sitting at home bored. And media and the public, they kind of ran with this narrative that now that the wreck of the Titanic was found, that it could possibly be raised. Or more importantly, they can get some of the valuables that were on board because there were a bunch of millionaires on. It was called the Millionaire Special. So they were running with, what if there's expensive jewels on board or there's valuables on board? There was also news reports where people were starting to argue over who owned the Titanic. There was a marine lawyer, Francis O'Brien. He went on one news program and he said that shipwrecks are not a game of finders keepers. He reminded the world that legally Titanic most likely belonged to the insurance company that paid for its loss. The Commercial Union Insurance Company of London dug through its records from 1912 and saw that they did in fact pay White Star Line $5 million for the wreck. But they do not own the wreck and they didn't know who did. Some news reporters asked Cunard for a comment on it because they felt like since Titanic was owned by White Star, which merged with Cunard, that maybe now they want to claim ownership. But Cunard made it pretty clear with a statement that they had no interest in trying to acquire the wreck of the Titanic. The media part of this was a nightmare for Dr. Ballard and John Louise, because remember earlier how I mentioned they released the footage to that helicopter that flew out? Well, when Dr. Ballard called Woods Hole again when he was still out at sea headed home, then he got in trouble with Woods Hole because they were like, we are getting threats of being sued by other news networks because you gave an exclusive. Dr. Ballard and John Louise didn't consider it to be an exclusive. They thought everyone should have access to the footage and the information. But the problem was that since only one news station was broadcasting it and was given it, other news stations looked at that as, not being fair. I don't know if that's illegal or not. I don't know much about the laws of media, but I know in America you can sue for anything, so I wouldn't be surprised if they probably could sue for that. And this was frustrating for Woods Hole as well because this was a Labor Day weekend. So you have all these reporters and all these people calling for interviews, comments, footage, or whatever, and most of the staff is not even there because they're out on a extended weekend for the holiday. So it was much harder to get information to pass through the proper channels because it was Labor Day weekend. There was another issue with the fact that this was a joint American and French expedition. So you had to make sure that the info was released both in America and France simultaneously. So they really tried hard to coordinate Dr. Ballard and John Louise that's how it would play out. But life happened, the plan didn't go accordingly, so a lot of the footage ended up being released to America first and took a bit longer before it was released in France, which stirred up some more tension between America and France with this expedition, and it kind of put, it seems, Dr. Ballard and John Louise in an awkward spot. As the media and the public were taking these ideas about the Titanic and just running with it, the historians were trying to kind of grab them and reel them back into reality a little bit. Ken Marshall had done an interview where he was talking about the wreck. I saw another one where John Eaton was talking about it. Even Walter Lord, who I refer to as like the godfather of Titanic historians, he even was commenting on the wreck. And all of them were saying the same thing, that this was a great find because it allows them to learn more about how the Titanic sank in her final moments, the breaking up versus the going down to one piece, but mainly also the location of where the Titanic was. That means they now have the Titanic's exact location, and they could answer that question about the mystery ship, or the Californian, which they were saying was like 20 miles away, but people were kind of questioning that. Now they would know for sure if that ship lied about how far away it was. On September 9th, 1985, Dr. Ballard, John Louise, and all of the crew arrived back in Woods Hole, Mass. They were met with a crowd, there were boats, there were people cheering, there was a banner. They got the nice warm welcome for what they achieved. They did it. They found the wreck of the Titanic. So they did the interviews, they did a little speech that they gave, and they went their separate ways. Now, Dr. Ballard did say that he made sure that him and John Louise gave each other a handshake and said a proper goodbye, because even though there was tension with the media and France and America, they didn't want any of that to get in the way of their friendship. And they had to separate immediately because Dr. Ballard had to be in DC the next day, and John Louise had to be in Paris the next day. So they both had to go fly out immediately with getting in from the ship. And I find it funny because Dr. Ballard actually mentions in a seminar that he gave that when he went to the Pentagon, he actually got in trouble. They kind of chewed him out a bit. They were like, you found the Titanic. You were just supposed to pretend like you were looking for it. You weren't supposed to actually find it. Because remember, this was a government cover-up for him looking at the Thresher and the Scorpion. So him looking for the Titanic was just supposed to be, yeah, I'm pitter-pattering around out here looking for this ship. But he found it, which means that he now created a whole new set of headaches and things that everyone had to deal with. Dr. Ballard did end up returning to the Titanic the next year on July 12th, 1986. Obviously, the wreck was much easier to find now because they had its exact location, so looking for it was no longer an issue. It was just getting out and actually exploring the wreck. It was once again funded mainly by the US Navy, but unlike the last one, it wasn't a French-American trip anymore. It was just an American expedition. The new research vessel they were on was called the Atlantis II, and they had 12 days to get all the footage that they needed for the expedition. Dr. Ballard did invite John Louise to come with him, but he had other engagements, so he couldn't make it. This time they had Alvin with them, and they were going to go down in their submersible Alvin to the Titanic and then let out their ROV, remotely operated vehicle, Jason Jr., so that he could go inside of the ship and they could get a closer look of the wreck. They ended up landing the submersible right outside where the glass dome of the grand staircase once would have been. It obviously was collapsed in now. And then they sent Jason Jr. down through the decks. The staircase itself was gone. If you read some of Dr. Ballard's older books, he says that he thought that, undersea organisms probably ate the wood and then the metal grating just collapsed down to the base. But James Cameron accidentally came up with a new theory as to what probably happened. When James Cameron was filming the movie Titanic, he built the actual grand staircase, or at least 3 levels of it. And he flooded it for real. That was not CGI or anything like that. The scene where the grand staircase is flooding and the glass dome caves in, that's real. And when the glass dome imploded and all that water came in, it actually caused the stairs to break free and float up and float out. It actually hit some of the actors whenever it happened. They didn't even think about that, but gravity was kind of the main thing that was holding these staircases in place. And when you have that buoyant wood with all of this water suddenly lifting up against it, it just broke the staircase free. So that's probably what happened, and that's why come Dr. Ballard and a lot of these expeditions that go down to the wreck are able to go inside of the grand staircase and just drop down this empty hole like an elevator shaft. Even though Dr. Ballard is the man that found the wreck of the Titanic, he's not the one who owns it. He never brought anything up from the wreck any of the times that he went down. The wreck is now owned by Titanic Inc. They are the only entity that's allowed to bring up any artifacts from the ship. And even then, there's still rules on what they can and can't do. From my understanding, they can't go inside of the ship to get any artifacts. They're only allowed to get the stuff from the ship's debris field. But I do think they're trying to petition so that they can go in and get parts of the ship's Marconi system. I do think I remember seeing them do something about that. And I'm not going to lie to you, I think that would be kind of cool. Dr. Ballard has been very vocal about the preservation of the Titanic, looking but not touching. He's been very disappointed over the years to have seen that the ship is starting to show signs of wear and tear from all of these expeditions that have gone down to the ship since. He said that there's been hundreds of expeditions done mainly by the French and the Russians. He's still very much deeply impacted about seeing the shoes that were scattered all around the wreck of the ship. And then he realized that these were the bodies of the victims. Between the sea creatures and the chemistry of the ocean at those depths, the human remains all just broke down back to nature, and the only thing that's left were those shoes. So he realized that all of these pairs of shoes that were still laced up and tied up were the remains of these bodies that just rained down around the wreck over time. There was one that stuck out with him the most. It was a pair of woman's shoes next to a pair of girl shoes, and there was a little hair comb there as well. And all around these shoes were towel, a vanity, like all of these parts of a second-class cabin. And Dr. Ballard believes that that was a mother and daughter that probably died in their cabin, and when the ship broke up, and whether on the surface or descending down to the sea floor, their bodies and the cabin around them was all scattered together. That's what he believes with that, and that's just an eerie thought to think about, isn't it? There was no way to get one big picture of the Titanic because 2.5 miles under the ocean, sunlight don't penetrate that deep. So what they ended up doing was taking all of these footage and all of these clips, and they got a very famous Titanic historian, Ken Marshall. Now, if you have read any Titanic book, seen any Titanic illustration, you have seen Ken Marshall's work. He is truly amazing. I mean, he's all about the accuracy and the details, all the way down to the rust stains on the side of the ship. He actually paints those in as well. So Dr. Ballard called Ken Marshall and told him that he wanted him to put all of these pieces together to come up with a painting of what the Titanic would look like. So Ken Marshall went through all of this footage and hundreds of pictures and picked out certain things that he needed zoomed in and blown up so he could get a closer look at it. And he put all of these images together and painted it, and saw that the Titanic was not this pristine shipwreck that everyone thought it was going to be. She had a much more violent final plunge and descent to the ocean floor than what people initially thought. Ken Marshall even said that after going through all of these pictures and seeing the Titanic like that, he ended up calling a friend and breaking down crying and saying, my ship is gone. Because the Titanic was, especially the stern section, it just looked horrible. And once again, in today's time, we talk about how the bow section is in good condition. Well, that's because we know what the Titanic looks like, and we know more about shipwrecks at that depth. But for 1985, as James Cameron kind of described it, when it came down to the sinking of the Titanic, there was a stateliness that, this beautiful liner just beautifully sliding and passing from one world into the next. And that's not how it actually happened. It broke apart. It was a violent destruction of the ship, and this was proof of that. John Lewis continued on to do other expeditions and exploration. Dr. Robert Ballard, he also moved on and explored the Lusitania, the Empress of Ireland. He's wrote many books, done many documentaries, lectures. I mean, the man is just an icon in the marine biology and oceanography world. When I went to Titanic Belfast last year, they said that Dr. Ballard was there just a week or two before I had been there, and that he was there with a bunch of kids and was walking through the exhibit with the kids and laying on the floor looking at that image of the shipwreck underneath. And they just were amazed that even for him to be in his 80s now, he's still very much passionate about educating children about the Titanic and marine exploration in the oceans and things of that nature. He's written so many books. Most of the info I got for this video came from Discovery of the Titanic, but there's many other books I have by him about this subject, and even though they're all about the same subject, each one has like a little bit more info than what the last one did, because once again, it was a government cover-up. So the first few books he wrote, he couldn't say but so much, and then after that, it kind of could just trickle out the truth more. I'm actually debating on going to go see Dr. Ballard next month. He's going to be in Maine, and I was like, oh, should I go see that? But we'll see, and we'll see how life goes. James Cameron himself even jokes that he made the movie Titanic so he had an excuse to go dive down to the wreck of the Titanic. Dr. Ballard has also been very vocal about preserving the ship by actually painting it. He wants to do a layer of a kind of anti-fouling paint that can slow down the decomposition of the ship, which I think that's actually a really cool idea if they could find a way to pull that off. And according to him, the technology is there. They just got to, get it organized and get it together. And that is my video on how they found the wreck of the Titanic. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I am so sorry that it took me so long to get to part 2 of this video, but I really appreciate you guys, and over time we have gotten to 1,000 subscribers, so thank you all so much. Thank each and every last one of you. I would also like to thank Danny Draws for allowing me to use his animations. His animations are amazing. I saw one of his videos a few weeks ago and I was blown away by it, and so you definitely should go check his channel out as well. If you want to see some computer simulations of the Titanic sinking or sailing, leaving Belfast, he has it all. But in the meantime, y'all be safe and have a good one.